Here's Brody Brazil.
Hey, welcome back. This is episode 2 of my Sports Broadcaster Series. And this time around, we'll be discussing how to craft a good interview. And yeah, that is me, back in the day on the Sharks bench, chatting it up with former D-man Scott Hannon, who, crazy enough, is now my colleague at NBC Sports, working the broadcasts, working the studio side, covering that very same Sharks team. You'll also take note, one of his teammates has their stick blade tucked behind my left ear. It's very intentional. They used to love to prank me on that bench and try and distract me from what I was there to do. And sports interviews are a big part of delivering a broadcast, whether you're talking to a player, a fan, a coach, a manager, somebody in the front office. You're here usually to help tell the stories behind the scenes or what's obvious in front of the camera, but storytelling and interviews are very much part of a sports broadcast. That's why I think this topic is so critical to anybody that's trying to become a sports broadcaster. On that note, and before we get too deep here, I do have to pull out the old Post-it note. Some things I want to say at the very start of this video. Number one, this is a series. This is episode 2. Episode 1 is already out. It's about going to college, picking the right college, making some college choices to get that first job, and your initial first experience in this industry. So check that out. Also stay tuned for future episodes. I have a couple more planned down the line. I'm also here to tell you that I'm not claiming to be the expert or the authority on all of these topics. It's just that I've been around for almost 25 years in this business. I've experienced a lot. I've seen others go through a lot, and I'm here to share and document as much as I can and the best advice I can pass along to somebody like you who might be considering this business. I talk to a lot of young people, and I share these tips and pieces of advice and tricks, if you will, and I usually do this in a one-on-one situation. So I thought, hey, why not make this for the YouTube channel so that it could be productive for so many more people down the road? Okay, Post-it note going away. Let's get rolling here with the video. The first thing you have to do to craft a good interview, because this doesn't just happen naturally. I mean, sometimes there's a cool interaction or some great back and forth, but it usually requires a lot of preparation. And the very first thing you want to do is think backwards. You know you're going to be doing some interview, but where will this run? Like during something, before something, after something? That's like the very first question you need to ask yourself. How long is this going to go? Yeah, how much time will this be given? How many subjects are you trying to hit here in this interview? Is it quick? Is it 1 question? Is it 4 questions? Is it 14 questions? Is it 40 questions? What's the final product going to look like? And where is it going to sit with everything else that's going on in a broadcast? Also, what's the tone here? What's the aim here? How are you delivering questions? What are the answers you're not hoping for, but what do you expect to get back? What is the aim? What's the purpose of this whole interview? Why are we talking to this person? And also, is this live or pre-recorded? There is a bit of a difference there. If it's pre-recorded, you might get a little bit more aggressive in terms of the types of questions or the way you'll ask them or the delivery of things. You'll take your chances. You know why? Because sometimes things can be edited. Oh, but if it's live, it's one take for you and the person you're talking to, and you want to get it right. So again, the context here of everything, where it's going to run, how much time, how many subjects, what's the overall tone and aim, and is this live or pre-recorded? You need to know all of that stuff before you craft a good interview. Now, when it comes to continuing to predict how this is going to play out, you really want to predict the vibe as well, too. And this is also kind of like preparing and laying out the land here. Is this interview taking place in season or out of season? What's the mentality of the person you'll be talking to like? Is this a game day where they're laser focused? Or is this a practice day in the season where they might be a little bit more relaxed and willing to talk about topics that aren't so stressful or pressing? Usually game day, you get bad answers. And that's the other thing here. What is a really good interview? Yeah, usually good questions, but you're honestly hoping for the best, most transparent, most heartfelt, easy to understand answers. I'm going to tell you that the questions are important, But the only thing more important than the questions are the actual answers and responses you get in this interview. And sometimes a great question will bring a great answer. Sometimes a great question brings a bad answer. Sometimes even a bad question, depending on the person and the situation, can bring a great answer. But generally speaking, the better the setup, the better the question, the better you can predict the vibe, the better answers you're going to get here. And so, yeah, is it a game day or a practice day? Because in pregame situations, you might get somebody who's so serious and gives you cookie cutter, very predictable answers, stuff that's cliche and you're not really going to like. In-game, like you saw me interviewing Scott Hannon there on the bench, that was during a Sharks game, during a TV timeout. I run out on the bench, wireless mic, tap him on the shoulder, start asking questions. That's a very difficult situation to be in. I would not recommend that for somebody who's just beginning in their sports broadcasting career, but that might be what you're tasked with doing. Just understand that that's one of the more difficult scenarios you could be in. Post games are also harder than they seem. There's a lot of easy questions out there. How did it feel? What was that play like? Talk me through what happened on 3rd and 12, or when you were down by 2 in the second period, or when you hit that 3-run homer in the 4th. Like, that's easy because they're just recounting a firsthand experience. But sometimes in post-game situations, you get players who are a little emotional about what they just went through. And that can be good. That can be great. But sometimes you need to be ahead of that curve and predict the vibe that they'll be in. So it's all about the preparation. And I said usually a really good question brings really good answers. I think that is a fair statement all the way around. It's all in the preparation. And before I get into all this, I spend so much time, so much more time than you know. Even doing a 10-question extended interview in a baseball dugout, for example. Those questions, and I write them down, and I'll talk to you about writing them down and having a hard copy in a second. But I go over that stuff like the day before, 2 days before, hours before, on the drive in. Is there a better way to ask that question? What are the overall topics I want to get to? Which ones will garner a good response? You should labor over the topics. And I'm not even kidding, a 15-minute interview, you might go over 15 different hours of the day. I don't mean 15 straight hours, but 15 times in the 3 prior days, you might be thinking about, oh, that's a good question. Or I just remembered that person and this thing, or a little research I did. You should work so hard on the topics. Fair or not, this is going to provide you a far better interview when you have the chance. And look, sometimes during a game, in-game situations, you don't have a chance to labor over the topics. You should work with the time you have. But if you're talking a long-form interview here or something you're preparing for, you should absolutely put a ton of work into that. And the questions are critical, but the phrasing is essential. Sometimes a matter of just a few different words here and there in your tone, your body language, and the way you ask it is going to get you a totally different response. I'm trying to do the math here. How many hundreds of interviews, if not thousands of interviews have I done? How many thousands, tens and thousands of questions have I asked to athletes and sporting people in the last 25 years? The number is a lot. It's in the tens of thousands. And I'm here to tell you that from younger people to middle-aged people to older people, doesn't really matter who they are. You can't predict too much from any specific demographic of person, but the phrasing, sometimes the body language, that is universal among all types of people who you might be interviewing. How you phrase things is so important because it's going to start the response and start the wheels moving in their brain of how they're going to respond to you. The more knowledge you have over situations and background and topics you're asking about, things you're covering, the more you know about that, I guarantee the more comfortable you are going to be in these situations. And yeah, I don't, some would say there's over preparation, and I agree. To a certain extent, you can overdo it. But for 85% of situations and individuals getting ready for an interview, the more prep you can do, the better off the interview is going to go. Here are some questions and things to avoid. Yes or no answers. Are you happy today? Yep. Okay, well, what's the follow-up to that? It leads you into kind of like a dead end. Yes and no answers, those don't really help you as an interviewer. Here's another one. how important was it for you guys to get this win tonight? What do you think the person's going to say? And I credit the great hockey broadcaster Drew Remenda. Many years ago, called me out for doing just that. The how important question. How important is it that your team gets the next goal? How important is it that you get back on defense after you turn the puck over? Those are obvious questions, right? So find a way to work in some knowledge, some actual detail, and not just say how important. Walk us through. Walk us through your shootout winning goal. Well, I shot the puck. It got behind the goalie. Walk us through your game-winning walk-off homer. Well, he threw me a fastball. I was sitting on 98. I pulled it. Talk about this. Talk about today. What is this person, a robot? And that might be more of a preference thing than anything else, but the expression talk about. So how important, walk us through and talk about are three crutches. And look, we're all still guilty of doing this on occasion. You might hear me in the future do one of these. It's not on purpose. I'd rather not. I'd rather stay away from all this stuff. And also, I mentioned before about the live versus taped thing. Maybe if you're pre-recording something and you know it can be edited and you're just taking a chance on this, I would generally avoid off-topic, like shocking questions or stuff that the person totally didn't expect because it was off the wall. Now, if you hit them before the interview, and I think there's a topic about this later, if you kind of prepare them for, hey, this is kind of wacky, so, open your mind up a little bit. But if the conversation is going from point A to point B and all of a sudden you throw in a point G and they're like, what? That's not going to benefit you in the situation. It's only going to make people look at you and say, what was that person thinking? So yeah, when it comes to difficult topics, right? Not crazy topics, but difficult topics. And I've got to tell you, sometimes you do need to bring up the difficult topics. It has a little bit to do, I guess, with journalism. If your job is journalism, I'm not even here to say that all of sports broadcasting is journalism. I think there's a relationship there, but it's not the exact same thing. But the point being here is that if you have to bring up a difficult topic, there's a couple ways to do it. And there's a couple tricks to doing it. It is necessary. If you don't ask the tough questions, at some point people are going to look at you and say, does this person not get it? Like, you're there to serve the audience. And yeah, you have to go down some roads that maybe are not the most comfortable. But here's a couple ways to do it. Number one, when I say prior clearance, I mean, sometimes you might want to ask if it involves the loss of somebody's family or a very difficult personal situation or something that involved their trauma. I would ask them, hey, look, before we get into this interview, I think this is a really important topic to discuss. And if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to ask you respectfully about it. There's your prior clearance. Or even if it's something that you're not going to give them a choice on, it's less controversial. Hey, I'm going to bring this up just so you know. I don't want to surprise you with it. I want to plant that seed. Be prepared how they might react to that, but that's a way to do it. I would also say show compassion. And if you ask these questions and somebody's going through it and they're fighting emotion in the moment, unless you're a robot or unless there's a reason you're not trying to show emotion, you can be sensitive. You can slow things down, just like I'm doing right here, right now. What was it like to play that next game after losing your mother? I think that's the delivery is everything. And I'm not even saying you're performative, and I'm saying that you are showing compassion to the situation, and the person you're talking to is going to respond to that so much better. And a large part of this is translating curiosity. I'm not here to grill you. I'm here to help tell your story. I'm here to ask the questions that maybe things you're thinking about or people want to know about or I'm thinking about. And if you have good intentions, generally I think that comes across. I'm not here to troll you, to try and grill you on things. It's not that. Good intentions are key. And this type of stuff, it happens often in interviews. They're not all about the home runs and the game-winning this and the touchdown that. I mean, sometimes there are difficult topics to broach in sports. Okay, I said earlier to have your questions kind of listed out. I would never go into an interview like unprepared or with no questions in mind. And even myself, I will give you the example. I did a couple interviews the other day here, and I'm not going to show you what's on them. I typed out some notes. I go on the computer. I'm able to put my thoughts together and write them down. it is so important to have a hard copy of your questions always. I either write them down or almost always print them because it's easier to make changes and then print them out. The type and the text is nice. But like, have the hard copy, because what happens when you get in this interview and your brains go in 10 different directions? It's your job to keep this thing, if it's 10 questions, on track, on target. So there's no problem with holding some notes, putting them right in front of you during your interview. Now, when the questions are on there, I typically don't write out the actual questions word for word. I reference what the topics are, but I don't read, so what is your big announcement today? I'll look down and say, well, next thing is what's the announcement? So I'll ask in my own words, what's the announcement? Your notes should not be scripted. Your questions should not really be scripted, but the topics can be there 1 through 10. And yeah, you can peek in between while somebody's talking. There's nothing rude with, yep, I'm listening to you. Yep. Okay, so now I know my next question as soon as you're done rapping. That's a difficult balance, and you don't want to be distracted, right? You don't want to get too far in your questions where your head's in the notes the entire time. You got to make eye contact, have camera presence, all that stuff. But it's absolutely okay to have a hard copy of your questions or your notes, so to speak, during the interview. And speaking of during the interview, a couple key points here. Don't forget about eye contact with a camera, with your subjects. Like, you want to be human in this process too. Camera awareness. Are you sitting up? Are you slouching? Are you in a position that you're going to regret later? Sometimes you get so comfortable in a conversation, you forget that it's actually being recorded. Be aware, be cognizant of where the camera is. Mindful of the time. I'm doing a video right now that we're past 15 minutes. I know how long I'm going. I typically have a clock that runs in the back of my brain of like how long an interview is going, but don't sit somebody down for 45 minutes if you're only going to use 5. Right? Be mindful and respectful of their time, the crew's time, the editing time that this is going to take. Definitely have a clock somewhere on your wrist, in the venue you're at, or just keep an eye on the time. Listen, listen, listen. Let me say it like 18 more times. Listen, listen, listen. Listen, 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 listen. Like, I cannot say this enough. Sometimes the person you're talking to drops something that you totally didn't expect and is gold. And if you're not listening and you don't have the ability to follow up on that and say, whoa, I want to ask you more about that. Hang on a second. Did you just say, right, something that you can only prepare for so much? You're not the expert on this. You're the curious one. The biggest part of interviews, beyond the questioning and the planning and the setup, and the execution of it, is listening during the interview. Listen to what's being said. You don't want to miss it. It's tough in real time. It's a lot going on. Preparing for your next question, maybe listening to a producer or director if it's live, like somebody in your earpiece. But maintain an ear and some brain space for the person you're listening to while they're talking. And then the last thing is, don't be afraid to throw this question in. Usually to start off an interview, I should have made this a tip too. A lot of times the first question for an interview is just an icebreaker. It's just to kind of get the wheels moving. You may or may not even use it. It doesn't have to be as simple as how you doing, how's it going, but it could be something just to warm up the individual. And the last thing, it could always be a standard question. Hey, thanks for the chat. Did I miss anything here that I need to know about or our audience needs to know about on these topics we've been discussing? Is there something that we didn't get to that you'd like to or you think is relevant? Trust me, that is a game-changing question if you start throwing that one into your mix at the end. So there you go. Crafting a good interview. It's a huge part of sports broadcasting. And even if you're somebody who says, well, I want to do this in my career. I want to be a podcaster. I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be a play-by-play announcer. Well, at some point, like, you're going to be interacting with athletes, coaches, like I said, fans or front office. And crafting a good interview is as important as anything else you'll do as a skill in sports broadcasting. So that wraps up episode 2. Thumbs up down below for being here and making it to almost 20 minutes. I really appreciate your support in this series. And don't forget to subscribe so I can definitely see you back here next time.